Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad, on Instagram at Movies TV Mad 555, and on TikTok at Movies TV Mad 555. Welcome to Saturday's edition of the DCEU Daily. The DCEU will never be as successful as the MCU, and that's okay, and here's why. Now, actually going back to Snyder's arc, Snyder's portion of the DCEU is probably actually more successful than the MCU. No, not in box office, you're correct, before you comment down below, but in terms of what he was doing. Because the Infinity Saga is literally a rip-off of what Snyder was doing in his arc. Let's take a look. Civil War is literally BVS, a rip-off, a still of BVS, the film that the broader audience hated, but still they swallowed it when it was the MCU. They've swallowed the MCU brand whole ever since Joss Whedon's first Avengers movie. It doesn't matter how good or how bad it is. So, you know, we look at Civil War, they introduced Spider-Man. BVS introduces Wonder Woman, right? And then we go to Infinity War. Well, Infinity War is pretty much Zack Snyder's Justice League Snyder Cut. And Snyder had these ideas first. You know, we all laud Kevin Feige as a genius. Well, I suppose it was genius to copy what Snyder was doing after all. Infinity War is just as dark as the Snyder Cut is as well. And then we go to Endgame, where Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark, Iron Man, sacrifices himself. Well, guess what? In Justice League 3, Ben Affleck's Bruce Wayne, aka Batman, was going to do the same thing. So it's interesting that Feige was so obsessed with knowing what Snyder was doing and allegedly ripping off and stealing his ideas. How did he get his ideas? Well, I think there's theories to that. Some people believe that it was Jeff Johns. We will never know. I can only allege these things. I don't have any evidence. So there's that. But you see, the portion of this video where I'm saying, you know, the DCEU will never be as successful or popular as the MCU, and that's okay, that's true. It is okay. They don't have to be. They just have to do their own thing. Now, they can do kind of the episodic movies, and they can have crossovers and post-credit scenes. That's fine. But they will never, it's too late. We will never be as popular or successful as the MCU. They did it. They got there. They created a brand that people will consume no matter how bad or good it is. We look at for Dark World. Not a particular great movie, not particularly a movie that people enjoy that much, but it didn't kill the franchise, did it? Iron Man 3, again, comes after the first Avengers movie. Wasn't very popular, some of the choices they made, but it still made over $1 billion. It's still one of the MCU's most successful movies because Iron Man was already popular. And the first Avengers movie made him even more popular. So they've got it. They've got it, and they're going to keep on going, and they're going to still, you know, they're still going to go with this tried and trusted episodic formula. And maybe we will too. But I think what we're doing with the multiverse strategy is very, very different. But I believe the multiverse strategy can at least be successful, but I don't believe we're ever going to be as successful as the MCU. I just don't believe it. I think there's been times where I said we can do that, but I don't think we can. I don't see how. And maybe I'll be wrong about that. I'm glad to admit that I'll be wrong about that. It simply is not going to happen. And what we need to do, and WB and DC and Walter Hamada and Sarnoff and Jim Lee need to do, is just focus on what they're doing. Because the multiverse strategy is a great idea, and it can be successful for the studio. We've seen us take an MCU director like James Gunn and do an R-rated movie, a brilliant R-rated movie, and not do very well within the pandemic. But then you look at something like Black Widow. That was day and date, like the Suicide Squad was. Okay, you know, pre-Delta variant, but still did very well. Now, later on today, we'll find out if Shang-Chi has had a good hold or a bad hold. But Black Widow had a bad hold, and she's still making right now over $400 million globally, which is amazing for this pandemic era. We've also seen other Disney films that are not on day and date, admittedly, doing really well and having great holds. But I think the key movie is definitely Black Widow. And you know, we can sit here forever and say, well, what went wrong with the Suicide Squad? I think in America, people definitely stayed at home and watched it on HBO Max. I mean, I supported it in movie theatres twice, as well as seeing a test screening many months prior to that. So I've supported the movie. I've pre-ordered the 4K. I will also buy the digital version on Amazon Video as well. I always do that with all my DC movies because I'm a loyal fan. But I'm one person and you're one person. But it just goes to show you that, I mean, what I think went wrong with the Suicide Squad wasn't anything to do with the marketing or, you know, the director or the decisions made with the movie. I just think there's not enough people interested in the Suicide Squad IP, you know, and next year is different. There's no day and date, there's no excuses, but something like the Batman should hit big, if only just for the opening weekend, because if people hate the movie, the opening weekend should still do well for Warner Brothers. But I expect it to have a great global run, and no day and date, as I say. So I'm excited to see that film and the other 3 movies this year as well, and as well as the stuff on HBO Max. Big year for DC. It's just been announced by Disney that from 2023 the MCU will have 5 movies a year, and I mean, I think the DCEU is going down that direction as well. But I think it's important. I think when the DCEU first started, all they could think of is beat Marvel, keep up with Marvel. But they still brought in an auteur because that's what they've always done, worked with auteurs. You know, Warner Brothers have very rarely, you know, worked with episodic directors, if you like. Because in the old days, movies were just one-off movies. We had a few trilogies back in the day when I was young, but mostly there weren't franchises. It was just one-off movies. Now and again, we'd get a second version of the movie, a sequel. We wouldn't normally get many trilogies either when I was young. You look at Star Wars, had a trilogy back in the 80s, and that was it. And you know, George Lucas could have taken advantage of how popular that franchise was, but he was a genuine guy just trying to tell a story. That's what I always respected about George. But we are in the era of the franchise. Now, I want to say something about the MCU because I think this is very important. I personally think what they've done has destroyed cinema in so many ways, and I'll explain to you why. Well, because it's so popular, people want everyone to do the same thing. How many times have you heard a review or someone complain about the pacing of a movie? Oh my God, they were talking for 10 minutes. Well, in the old days, when I was growing up, talking was good. You know, narrative dialogue was great, as long as the dialogue had a bit of pace to it, and you know, the characters had some dynamic, and you know, a good dynamic, and some, you know, great kind of chemistry between each other. But nowadays it's all about the action, it's all about the giggles, and there's not much dialogue wanted by critics or consumers, which is a shame. I mean, Wonder Woman 84 had this problem at the beginning of the film. There was a lot of dialogue. People said it was a pacing problem. I don't think the dialogue was great in Wonder Woman 84, but I don't think you can vote a film down just because they talked a lot at the beginning. It happens with BVS as well. You know, we have that great set piece at the beginning. We see Batman's origins. We see the Battle of Metropolis through Bruce Wayne's perspective. It's very exciting. But then we go, and I wouldn't call this a lull, but there's a lot of dialogue going on between the Senator, Lex Luthor, lots of different things going on. There's that scene in Clark and Lois's apartment, which is a great scene, by the way, but some people may find that boring. So there's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of slower pacing in BVS, but it all means something. And for me, it personally worked. When I first saw, after the opening set pieces, how slower it was, I thought, blooming hell, this is like an indie movie, because this is what indie movies do, right? Very few indie movies have got that much action in them anyway. That's how they can deliver them so cheaply with a cheaper budget. And so that's a problem that the MCU have created as well. You know, that people don't want to see a real film with acting, you know, with a story rather than explosions and CGI. This is how far we've come now. So I think the MCU has done a lot of damage to the future of cinema because people don't have the concentration levels to watch a Fields of Dreams or an Untouchables or a Goodfellas. I mean, Goodfellas has a bit of shooting in it, people die and stuff, but there's not much action in Goodfellas. It's a story with people talking. Now, we've seen, Scorsese do a couple of other projects recently that are the same. And they've been over on Netflix. They haven't, the one he did last year, and I forgot what it was called, was very talky, not much action in it. I don't think you could have released that in the theatrical system because I think it would have flopped, even as a Martin Scorsese movie. But maybe I'm wrong. I think the environment has changed because of the MCU, and there's no going away from that. But if you want me to tell you how do you make a comic book movie that can really excite the broader audience? Well, there's two movies, and they did it better than the MCU. There's Aquaman and there's Shazam. And you can argue with me that Shazam didn't make a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. I know that all the families who go to cinemas and, all the children that I know, like nieces, nephews, brothers, sisters, friends, they all went to see that movie. And because they know I'm obsessed with this stuff and I do my videos, in fact they watch my videos, so hello, they said, wow, we love this movie. So that doesn't mean it made a lot of money, but people who went there, it hit its target audience. It pleased its target audience. That's not an MCU movie. There's nothing like an MCU movie. Yes, there's gags. But Shazam is actually a very important movie. If you've ever been adopted, if you've ever felt like an outsider, Shazam's there. This is a family who are not fucking related, but in the end of the film, unite together. They might not be that close at the beginning, although I think kind of the Foster family are close. But I forgot, Billy Batson, I'm crap with names, yeah. Asher Angel's character, Billy Batson, he's very resistant to this family unit. He's left so many other families. He wants them to hate him so he can be thrown out and just keep on looking for his mum. He believes his mum is his future. It's only when he meets her and she rejects him, that's the biggest moment from the movie. Not the action set pieces, not Savannah, who's great, but that element, the flashback, how when we actually find out, all this time, Billy believes that his mum lost him, but that she actually lost him on purpose. She saw the kid with the police. She couldn't handle bringing him up, and she left him. It's devastating. It's devastating for Billy. So it's a great movie. Then we look at Aquaman. Again, a movie about an outsider. Does he feel at home at the surface level? Not really. Does he feel he belongs to Atlantis? No. This is a man of two worlds. It's a brilliantly executed movie by James Wan, and I think Jason Momoa does a great job. I like those films because those films really are the example of how you make, comic book movies for the broader audience. And the broader audience love both those movies. It doesn't matter about the box office. I want to educate you. It doesn't matter about the box office of Shazam. But you can't argue that Aquaman is the most successful DCEU movie of all time thus far, and there's a reason for that. People like the movie. It's as simple as that. So they're the style of the movies. Those movies prove that the broader audience can come in, even with a lesser level, like Shazam. But Shazam's a grade Z character anyway. So it was always going to make less money, and they were clever about the budget, what Water was. And so both those movies, going forward, Shazam and Aquaman should be the blueprint on how you make movies for the broader audience, and it proves that the DCEU can do it. Now, if you want to make Snydery type of movies, you can do that as well. I'm not saying they shouldn't do that. I'm just saying, the blueprint of how to make proper CBM movies that everyone enjoys, it's there with Shazam and Aquaman. But even those movies will never be as popular as the MCU movies. You see, the MCU mostly doesn't make good individual movies. In 20 years' time, 50 years' time, when there's no MCU, maybe there will be, but I assume there won't be. People will be watching other stuff in the cinema. But if you went back to say, oh, I want to watch this film, go and watch one of their movies. they're episodic. They're part of a franchise. They don't work individually. I actually think the early solo movies do. I think that was really good at, you know, things like Iron Man 2, not that I like Iron Man 2 a great deal, but you can still watch it as an individual movie. Captain America, the First Avenger, again, you can watch that as an individual movie. They work as a movie and as part of a serialized, chapterized franchise. But when you get to Joss Whedon's Avengers movie and then you go on, there's not many that you can watch individually. I think Captain America and the Winter Soldier, you can probably watch that individually as well. But the further along you go, Shang-Chi cannot be kind of valued as an individual movie. It only works because it's part of the MCU. If it's just an individual Marvel movie, no one's going to be interested in it. I promise you. Because it's an okay film, but on its own, without the MCU, that movie hasn't got a chance in hell without succeeding. And we all know that. So the DCEU may not ever be as successful as the MCU. And as I said on the top of the show, it doesn't have to be. What we need to focus on is making films, for now, in the style of Shazam and Aquaman. Now, that doesn't mean that a film like Flashpoint will be the same, but it will use the same values. It will have an emotional anchor, it will have great special effects, it will have great performances, it will be well directed, it will be well written. And that's what we're looking for going forward. I think the success of the Hamadaverse, and I know I'm going to get people in the comments, is Aquaman, because people are still saying he had nothing to do with it, but is Aquaman and Shazam. They're the two movies from the DCEU that they're the ones that Hamada can say, well, we got these two right. Now, no one can argue that Shazam is part of his kind of ballpark. Now, people say, well, yeah, that wasn't very successful, but it was with the people who watched it, and the movie made a profit at the end of the day. So, when you look at the MCU movies, I don't think many MCU movies are actually as good, fun, or entertaining as Aquaman and Shazam. Look at them. There's, you know, I look, okay, Infinity War, okay, Captain America and the Winter Soldier, maybe, but mostly, with the direction they're going in now, I don't think many films, in terms of entertainment and laughs, are not as good as Aquaman and Shazam. Excuse me. So we've proved we can do it. But you see, you as a fan and me as a fan should never have to worry about beating the MCU. But these DC movies should be making bank. Like Aquaman did and like Shazam did. Those movies made bank. Whatever you say, Shazam made bank. It made a profit. Whatever you say, it doesn't matter. That's the truth. So I think that Shazam and Aquaman are a great example. But I'll go back to what I said on the top of the show. That the Infinity Saga is a rip-off of Snyder's arc. So that says, that's great credit to Zack Snyder. They took his arc and they actually completed his arc in the MCU. It's actually nuts, right? And you'd have to be very deluded to even deny this is true. And of course, it's wrong on every level. Snyder was really betrayed by so many people. And I don't know why. He was, you know, this is what happens when you're different and unique, you see. People try and destroy you, ruin you. But what they didn't know about Zack Snyder is that he was a fighter. He never gave up. He got his way. He got at least his Snyder cut out there, and who knows? Who knows? This is the entertainment industry. Anything can happen. But at the end of the day, the DCEU can still be successful. We just have to focus on ourselves and not on the MCU. I want us to keep on making great individual movies that also slot in as part of a franchise. And I think Shazam and Aquaman are great examples of this. You can watch those movies individually. You don't have to watch the rest of the franchise, but they still feel as part of a franchise. So I like that. Even Birds of Prey, a film I don't like, it's kind of connected to the first Suicide Squad. It works as an individual movie if you like that type of thing. And even Wonder Woman 84, another film I don't particularly warm to, it still kind of works as part of the franchise and as an individual movie if you like that kind of thing. And not everyone did, but there's fans of these movies, right? And I think that's what I like about the DCEU, and this is why I prefer it. Man of Steel, watch it individually. BVS connects completely to MOS, but you can watch it individually. Same with the first Suicide Squad, same with the first Wonder Woman. It works. So, in those terms, the DCEU isn't a bad franchise. It's just that everyone compares it to the MCU. And in terms of James Gunn's The Suicide Squad not doing so well at all in movie theatres, it still made money for them on HBO Max. And it's a damn fine movie. So just enjoy the movie. If you like the movie, be proud of it. Be proud to go on Twitter and say, I love this movie. Don't worry about the box office. He's already got his sequel. It's irrelevant. And we know the DCEU is moving on. We know they're rebooting the franchise to a point. So, as I say, it's about these movies making money so they can keep on making more. So next year's movies need to make money. But they don't need to beat Marvel next year. They don't need to beat Shang-Chi this year. It is what it is. It's time for us in the industry to accept that there's no catching up with the MCU. And the other question we have to ask ourselves, do we really want to catch up with the MCU? Do we want to be completely what they are? I say no. Listen, I didn't grow up being a Marvel fan. I discovered Superman and Batman first, so that made me a DC boy. But I grew up with Spider-Man, who I adore. I grew up with the Incredible Hulk through Bill Bixby's, Kenneth Johnson's Incredible Hulk TV series. So and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends animated show was great as well. So I'm not a Marvel fan. I like their characters, but I'm not. Let me know. I'm a Marvel fan in terms of the comics, and I don't mind the MCU movies. I just don't feel I could sit there and binge that franchise. I don't. Maybe one day I will. And it's actually quite difficult. The bigger these franchises get, the more difficult it's going to go back and binge the lot. I mean, I think the MCU's got over 20 movies, and that's not even including the Disney Plus shows they now have. Who's got the fucking time to binge them? And personally, I wouldn't waste my time. But the thing is with DCEU, the DCEU thus far, you can individually take one of those movies out of your collection and watch them individually. And I hope that continues. Now, I don't agree that I want self-contained movies in every movie. I don't mind now and again having a one-off movie, but I think the plan is to connect the fucking lot. If there's been a live-action movie, it connects now to the DCEU from Flashpoint onwards, and that's very exciting. But I just want people in the industry at heart to understand that chasing the MCU dream, that's fine. But I don't think we'll be that brand that people automatically go and see. I think the DCEU has always had to make great movies to get people to go and watch them. And it's interesting with the Suicide Squad because it's a really good film, and the public cinematically, theatrically, didn't support it, and that's a really good film. But that's what I mean. I think they really have to be a good film, and it also proves that the Suicide Squad isn't a very popular IP either. But when you look at Joker, the Joker movie had to be so good to make over $1 billion. Aquaman had to be so good to make over, $1 billion. Shazam is a really good family movie, and that couldn't get anywhere near the box office of the Joker and Aquaman. So that proves we have to, at DC, we have to make better movies, airtight movies. And the MCU don't. It's not fair, but it's a fact, isn't it? The MCU don't actually have to make great movies, and they still make bank. I don't think Iron Man's a great movie. Iron Man 2 certainly isn't a great movie. I think The Incredible Hulk's a great movie, but it didn't make the money and it didn't get the response people wanted, right? But I think that's a better movie than most of the movies. I think the first Captain America, the first Avenger is probably better than the first few movies. A lot of people don't like that movie. But the MCU don't have to make good movies, and Feige knows that. And Iron Man 3 is proof of that, the money it made, because they were literally just living, they're still living off the hype from the first Avengers movie, and it hasn't ended. And me as a DCEU, stan, I'm always hoping and praying that they fail. And I know people say that's a bad attitude, but it's like supporting Manchester United, which I do. Ronaldo debuts later on, can't wait for that. But, you know, it's like supporting a sporting team. You want the opposition to fail. So I always want the MCU to fail. But in the past few weeks, I've come to the realisation that that's not going to happen. So just leave it alone. Let's focus on our movies. We will never capture those heights. But I think the focus must be on making good movies, great movies that the public enjoy. And as long as they make a profit so they can keep on making more, that's all we need to worry about. I think the studio has to understand this as well. Because if they don't, I think they're going to get themselves in the same trouble they did. Chasing the popularity and the brand recognition of the MCU is what got Warner Brothers in trouble. It's why they didn't allow Snyder to complete his arc. And let's be absolutely clear about this. You're in the middle of a fucking arc. Let the man finish what he's doing. Let him incite his flashpoint and start with somebody else if that's what you want to do. But at least now they have a president of DC Films. It may not be a person some people believe in. I still think this is a guy who can do a good job. But we'll have to wait and see what happens, especially when Zaslav and Discovery come in. We will never know, and I'm not making any predictions or cemented predictions on whether he goes or stays. I think if his movies are successful, he'll stay, and if they're not, he'll go. And people will say, well, what about, you know, what about the Suicide Squad, Birds of Prey, and Wonder Woman 84? Well, no one's going to judge him on that. He will be judged on the multiverse strategy, his multiverse strategy, his idea, and that is Flashpoint. He will be judged on Flashpoint. If Flashpoint succeeds, then he stays. If that plan fails, and the beginning of the plan failing means the plan's fucking failed. You can't keep on hopping along, you know, putting chewing gum and blue tack on things that are falling to pieces. You know, it's not going to work. So Flashpoint has to work for him. And if it doesn't, he's finished. And as I've said many a times before, I don't know where we go from there. But nothing's failed yet. We're not in 2022, so we can look forward to these four, you know, theatrically run projects and cinematic kind of release projects for next year. And we can also look forward to the DC HBO Max stuff as well. I can't tell the future, but I think as someone who works a small part in the industry, I think it's important to focus on your own game. Stay in your own lane. Stop focusing on the MCU. Later on, I'll be on Twitter and I'll be boasting about Shang-Chi's box office again. And it will hurt me a little bit, especially with what, you know, the Suicide Squad didn't do. But then I realise it's all about next year. And as long as we make profits to keep on making more movies, it's fine. We don't have to be as successful as the MCU, because the fact remains we will never be as successful as the MCU. But we can make better content than the MCU, because I believe mostly we already have. Yes, there's a few films that you can say aren't good enough, and that's fine. But mostly the DCEU has got some fine individual movies you can enjoy. Now, the multiverse strategy is about making it a franchise rather than just individual movies. But I think if they do this properly, we can have the best of both worlds. And that's what I want. And you as fans just want to see great DC movies where these DC universes and DC characters are done justice to. And I think some of you feel that hasn't been the case, and some of you do. So there's always a split there. But this is why they're doing this, to unite everyone together, to unite the whole of the DC live action universe together. And as I've said from the first moment I found out about this, you know, at DC Fandom last year, I was very hyped for it, because done properly, this could make DC a very, very popular live action franchise. But I just feel anyone who expects the DCEU to do what the MCU have done financially and having the whole of the broader audience on their side, I think that's going to be difficult. It's difficult because how people perceive the DCEU. People have perceived the DCEU as broken since Man of Steel. And you know, you could say the odd movie, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, who's done really well, and of course the Joker movie, that is not connected to the DCEU, but they still see it as a problem that needs fixing. And the Flash movie is supposed to fix that problem. As I say, I would have stuck with Snyder. I would have allowed him to finish his arc, then start again. That was his plan as well. So that's where the mistake was. They got rid of Snyder because they were chasing the MCU dream. And that's a dream that will never become a reality for the DCEU. And that's okay. I'm Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wives. This has been the DCEU Daily here on Movies TV Mad. So follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad. Follow me on Instagram at Movies TV Mad 555. And on TikTok at Movies TV Mad 555. Like, share and subscribe. Remember, if you're not getting the notifications, you know, just look for my videos. Make sure you press like, because 1 minute I'm going on my video and I've got loads of likes and then it's reset to 0. There is something seriously wrong with YouTube, but there's nothing wrong with us. We're just passionate DCEU stans. I will see you in the next video. Until then, goodbye.